So this review is for The Wizardry of Oz, the artistry and magic of the 1939 MGM classic. It's by J. Scarfone and William Stillman, who have done quite a few Wizard of Oz books. So when I was doing the overview of the making of the Wizard of Oz books, I planned on that being a 5-minute video, and in fact I thought I was going to struggle to come up with 5 minutes worth of material for that. It ended up being over half an hour, I think, and that's because I sort of ended up giving away a lot of my reviews for the books in that video. So if you haven't seen that video, definitely check that out. So I think this video will be more focused on the flip through, which I didn't really do too much of in the overview, and also just sort of reiterating a lot of the review points that I made in that video. So I said that Scarfone and Stillman had done a few Wizard of Oz books. Their first, to my knowledge, was the 50th anniversary pictorial history, which was in 1989, and then this book in 1999. And then they did a revised and expanded edition in 2004, which is definitely the one you want to get. Often it can be hard to know if revised and expanded editions of books are worth shelling out a second time for, but this one is a vast improvement on the 1999 edition. Also, this is by far my favorite book on the making of the Wizard of Oz, and in fact one of my favorite making of books of all time. And even though it's actually quite a surprisingly quick read, it just has this level of detail that I really enjoyed, and it really made me feel that after reading this I felt almost like I could use this book as an instruction manual for how to make the Wizard of Oz. They really go into, see, here's a section on making the makeup and prosthetics, and they really go into the detail of exactly how they produce these latex masks, and in the makeup they mention the exact specific products that were used. It just has such a fantastic level of detail and insight that there's very little in this book that feels superfluous. And yet, having said that, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to every Oz fan. It's for a specific type of fan, which I definitely fit into, and that is, it really focuses on the art and craft of the making of this movie. There's not very much necessarily on the sort of history or story of the making of the movie. Pretty much all of the other books on the making of The Wizard of Oz do that. So it was actually really great for this book to, it feels the most unique. It really stands out in terms of the content, which is surprising when Scarfone and Stillman have done, to my knowledge, at least 3 books on the Wizard of Oz, and none of them feel repetitious. And this one, like I said, for me definitely stands out, not just as a Wizard of Oz book, but as a making of book. This is also the book that has the most sort of artwork that was produced for the film, in terms of costume sketches and then matte paintings and then things like that. See, it might not be particularly great by today's standards, but there's certainly really interesting documents. This book has tons of photos that I have never seen anywhere else, either online or reprinted in other books. It definitely has some of my favorite photos. So here's some costume sketches for the Munchkins, and it's really nice to see this sort of stuff because artwork for films was not produced in the same quantity as it is today. Additionally, even though the authors are obviously very big fans of the movie, the book does not suffer from any sort of fanboying, which is really nice. And similar to Harmits's making of The Wizard of Oz, this book does a really great job of presenting, if there are two conflicting stories for how something was done or what happened, they will present both, which is really nice. One thing I sort of learned through reading these books on The Wizard of Oz is that anytime there are sort of like discrepancies or things that are kind of a bit hard to believe, usually it's because the filmmakers, actors, etc., who they interview are not necessarily the most reliable sources, which is kind of interesting. Really, one of the only exceptions I found is Margaret Hamilton, who played the witch. She sort of is the... Look at this picture of Scarecrow smoking a cigarette. Margaret Hamilton, to me, feels like the only one who's sort of trustworthy, and having said that, that's only because in a lot of her interviews in the making of The Wizard of Oz, Algene Harmits's book, is because she often says, like, she doesn't know or she forgets. A lot of the other people who are interviewed, everyone from, producers, writers, directors, the Munchkins, sort of anyone who sort of is anyway related to this movie sort of tends to paint themselves as always kind of the hero or the person who came up with an idea. Which is actually makes these books kind of interesting, because with modern making of books that come out to coincide with the films, there's usually only sort of like one story. There's not much discrepancy, so it's really interesting to see, people getting interviewed, say, 40 years or more after the film was made, and either their memories playing them false or, perhaps they're embellishing the truth a bit. It's really interesting to have, sort of two conflicting stories. That often happens, and both William and Scarfone and Algene Harmits do really great jobs of presenting both sides and, citing the sources and trying to, without too much heavy-handedness, figure out which one might be the correct story. Let's see, these blueprints I've certainly never seen. This book just has everything is done so well on this book. There's really nothing that I can fault it for. The pictures included, like I said, I've never seen anywhere else, and they're really great choices, and and the text as well. So much new information that I hadn't read anywhere else either. And I think what allows this book to be that and to be so good is because, like I said, it's very focused. It's not trying to necessarily capture the entire history or making of this movie. This is really focusing on the artistry of making this film. Costumes, makeup, sets, all the special effects. And this book really benefits from that focus, as opposed to a lot of other books that try and capture the whole story. End up, you never feel like you get enough detail. Things go by so quick and jump around a lot. But this is just fantastic. this chapter on special effects is fantastic, just to, to read about in so many modern day making of books. It's just all about computer wizardry, and so to sort of hear the stories and breakdowns of how all these practical effects were achieved is really great, because especially for this movie, because The Wizard of Oz is technically just so ahead of its time. So ahead of its time. Scarfone and Stillman's books always sort of have a section on the promotion. This is the section that sort of feels quite a bit out of place, because it's on the promotion of the film, but their books always feature a lot of like promotion and merchandising stuff, because they are both sort of first and foremost collectors of Wizard of Oz memorabilia, so tons of this stuff is from their private collections, and I guess they're really into that stuff. And I said it was out of place, but I certainly don't mind it. Seeing all of this stuff is really interesting as well. All these magazine covers. International posters. I think in here mentions somewhere that Margaret Hamilton, in I'm not sure what year, revived the character of the witch for an episode of Sesame Street. She played the witch again, which is pretty interesting. So then these next two sections are kind of, again, don't really necessarily fit in with the bulk of the book, but it's nice that they just included them as, appendices. So this one's the photography of Peter Stackpole. Is that his name? Peter Stackpole. And then the second section is on Terry, the dog who played Toto, which I thought was so weird, because I was like, why did they need to put a section just about, like a whole section on the dog, the career of the dog? But then I found out there is also a book called I, Toto, which is like a whole proper biography on the dog, which blew my mind. So I hope you enjoyed this look through my favourite Wizard of Oz book, and hopefully this flip through will help you decide if it's something you're interested in. I'll include the links in the description below, because the main part of doing these flip throughs and discussions is because, I realize not everybody expects or wants the same things from their books, to sort of help you understand the differences between all the vast number of Wizard of Oz books, if this is something you're interested in. But if you are really interested in the sort of craft of movie making, or even movie making at this time, this book is just so excellent, and also includes a bibliography, very, very helpful. It's a shame more books don't do that. And ditto, an index makes it really, people with I don't know if there's an ebook version of this, but ebook people might be like, who cares about an index? But an index certainly is useful for us book mavens who are juggling a number of books and need to know exactly where to go to find the right information.